But Florida, of course, Oklahoma lurking as well at number 8 with the 1 loss to BYU. But Florida no longer has the savior, Tim Tebow. Of course, Urban Meyer claims that Tebow will be ready in 2 weeks. Florida has a bye this next week and then is going to play against LSU. Is it at home or away?
Away.
It's at LSU.
At LSU.
Urban Meyer says Tim Tebow will be okay. You take a look at this hit and you tell me if you would be okay in 2 weeks. The original hit doesn't look that bad, really. There was no helmet-to-helmet contact from that defensive end. Tim Tebow obviously down, totally knocked unconscious there for at least a couple seconds. And you'll take a look again, his head hits the knee of his defensive lineman, and it's just disgusting. How does this affect the national championship race? Is there no effect? Is Tim Tebow lists Gators or impaired Tim Tebow with Florida still good enough?
We'll see. I mean, Tim Tebow is a tough guy. He might be back in 2 weeks, and it'd be a lot easier if this LSU game came later in the year. But the toughest regular season game on Florida's schedule is in 2 weeks in Death Valley against LSU. So if they beat LSU and if Tim Tebow's back or even if he's not, they could very easily run the table, but it's unfortunate timing. That LSU game is going to be huge to see if Tim Tebow is back. Unfortunate
timing in that regard, but fortunate scheduling. Florida misses Ole Miss, Alabama, and Auburn in the regular season. Of course, Ole Miss did lose this past weekend to South Carolina. Big win for Steve Spurrier's gang. But, Alabama not on the regular season slate, but
they may have to go through them for the SEC championship game.
Right. And then you look also, Texas only has Oklahoma and Oklahoma State really left as big barriers. Of course, Oklahoma State lost to Houston. Alabama has at Ole Miss and LSU, and they already beat Virginia Tech, which brings us to Virginia Tech, by the way. Is Virginia Tech good? They're highly ranked.
That's the whole thing with Virginia Tech. You have
a close one to Alabama.
Beamer ball, right? Good defense, good special teams. That's been the Virginia Tech thing for the past couple years. It's a breakdown of schedules. Their only ranked team left on their schedule is Georgia Tech, and given that, they could run the table. It's possible, and especially with the BCS system, it's all about whether you win games. It's not about how good of a team you are. And they've got the schedule. They could really make a push for the national title.
We're really going to open up the BCS can of worms right now. Well, let's talk about that for every week for 10 weeks. But no, really for me, it just comes down to that fluke win against Nebraska at home. Tyrod Taylor, as one of my comm professors said to begin in class, could not hit the broadside of a barn the entire game. And then on that last drive, all of a sudden he's got everyone and his brothers open, and he finds them. Truly remarkable. Well, we'll have to take a look. Boise State is lurking, and that just bugs me. We're going to take a commercial break, but on the other side, we're going to preview the showdown with Little Brother. All right, welcome back to Varsity Blue. Alex Prasad alongside Scott Wagner, and I'm going to have a lot of fun in the next 2 minutes because we're going to talk about Michigan State's start to this season. Currently, Michigan State stands at 1-3. They had a resounding victory over Montana State. Good for Michigan State. Every D1 opponent they have played, they have lost to. Of course, this is a team that was 9-4 last year, but when you really break that down, they were really not as good as 9-4. They're outgained by their competition last year. Javon Ringer was the least efficient starting running back in the Big Ten. You can take a look, 44-3 over Montana State, who lost to Central Michigan, which we'll have clips of later. The loss to Notre Dame in a heartbreaking fashion, and then a resounding loss to Wisconsin. And then you can see a little bit of information about that Wisconsin game. I mean, Wisconsin just dominated Michigan State, which it should scare Michigan. It has to travel to Camp Randall in the second to last week of the year. That's a tough little closing stretch there at Wisconsin, home against Ohio State. But the focus right now is on Michigan State's ineptitude. Let's not forget that. Did you see this coming? And are they really that bad?
I don't think they're that bad.
I've asked that question like 4 times today about teams. But
I think they're a better team than Central Michigan. I don't think they're as good a team as Notre Dame, but I think they should have played better against Wisconsin. Obviously, you saw 4 turnovers. That's a whole lot of turnovers for a football game. They're not as good as people were making them out to be at the beginning of the year. They're not going to repeat the 9-4 year that they had last year, but they're not a horrible football team. They're not going to continue this pace throughout the year. I think they'll pick it up. They'll win some more football games.
Well, they certainly have some good athletes, and they certainly have played below what they should have at this point. The level of play is definitely low, but as a typical Michigan State. I mean, in the Central Michigan game, the Central Michigan kicker misses the field goal, but Michigan State was lined up offsides. So they get a second bite at the apple, and you see they succeeded at it. I mean, it was just a comedy of errors often describes Michigan State's football program. And it seemed like Mark Antonio last year had controlled those forces with a very conservative offense that just grounded out. What is that one State fan cheering for? I don't understand that. That clip just bothers me every time I see that guy jumping up and down. Maybe he's a Central fan, didn't have the courage to wear Central gear to that game. But Michigan State, do you think that they are more dangerous or more desperate? And this is a question that was asked of Rich Rodriguez as well, and he said, of course not. Everyone's going to take a rivalry like Michigan State seriously. But do you think the Spartans are more dangerous now, at 1-3, at a point in their season where a fourth loss, bowl eligibility is starting to become a conversation if they lose this upcoming weekend?
If desperation were in question, Alex, they should have played better last Saturday against Wisconsin. It's a rivalry game, so it will be tough, and it might be closer than it would be if it were just Michigan State playing in a vacuum. But Michigan State, they're good enough to make a bowl game, I think. And like I said, at East Lansing, it'll be an exciting atmosphere. It's going to be a close game, I think.
There might be a whole 75,000 people that show up to that game. Yeah. All right, well, let's talk X's and O's, Scott, and let's start with Michigan on offense. What does the Michigan offense need to accomplish against the Michigan State defense that's looked pretty awful so far this year? The second worst pass defense in the Big Ten at 250 yards a game. Of course, Michigan doesn't have a lot to boast about there either. Their average is about 235. But their defense only has 3 takeaways. They've given up over 400 yards in their last 3 losses. They do have the 4th best rush defense in the league, but what are you looking for Michigan to establish here? Keeping in mind Tate Forcier's shoulder will not be 100%. He may play, and he might be effective, but it will not be 100% this Saturday.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see how Tate Forcier's arm feels, how his shoulder feels, because really Michigan's passing game, if they can be on, can win this game because Michigan State's pass defense is just horrendous. Tate Forcier needs to have a good game. He can't struggle like he has the past 2, and hopefully his shoulder feels better because Brandon Miner and Carlos Brown can carry the load because Michigan has a fantastic running team, but the weakness of Michigan State's team is in their secondary, and so you're naturally going to want to exploit that.
Yeah, of course, Grant Wistrom, a great defensive lineman from Michigan State, released from prison early to partake in fall practice. I just had to mention that because that is just so disgusting. But I totally lost my train of thought, but that's angered me so much I had to work that in there. Yeah, I think it's going to come down to Michigan, how are Michigan wide receivers able to uncover themselves against that Michigan State secondary? I think the answer is going to be yes. Tate Forcier's shoulder is, operable, which it was on that Martavius Odom's touchdown throw. Things look good on the offensive end. But moving to the defensive end, not so much for Michigan. Of course, the defense has been the concern all year. And Michigan State has one of the most efficient passing offenses in the Big Ten thus far.